Hey guys, before watching this video may feel a bit rushed because this video was rushed during production because of my YouTube burnout. So I do apologise if this video is not up to your standards that you would be expecting from this channel. Hey guys, welcome to the evolution of Nintendo controllers. So in this video, I'm going to be going through every single Nintendo controller, starting with the NES from 1985, all the way up to the Nintendo Switch from 2017 onwards. So with that said, let's get started. First up, we have the NES controller for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This came out in 1985 along with the console itself. Now, for today's standards, this would have been a very simple controller, but when comparing this to other controllers from this generation, this would have been the most advanced controller of all of them. Because back then a lot of controllers were just boxes with joysticks sticking out of the top of them. Take the Atari 2600 for example. Now the NES controller is a rectangular controller with no grips or whatever, because back then controllers didn't have grips. But it was one of the first controllers to use this. It's called a D-pad here. It's basically the replacement for the joystick at the time, but the joystick returned sometime in the 1990s with the N64 for Nintendo. Also the controller has two face buttons, so you get B and A right there. B and A. And you get a select and a start button right here. So select will be to select something in the game, and start will be to pause or go into the game. And if you look at the D-pad, you can see it has arrows on them to indicate which direction. And the cord comes out from the top, and weirdly, it's not in the center of the controller like where it should be. Instead, it's towards the left. And here's the back of the controller. You can see how simple it is for its time. Well, not simple for its time, I meant simple for today's standards. But back then, this would have been a very advanced controller. And actually, it's not that hard to use once you get used to it, because it is very simple to use, thanks to its lack of buttons except for these 5 right here. Next up, we have the SNES controller. This came out in 1990 for the SNES itself, and as you can see, Nintendo has changed it quite a bit. For example, we now have 2 extra face buttons on the front. We have Y and X. Remember, on the NES it only had 2, but now on the SNES it now has 4 face buttons. Also, the select and the start button have now been angled. To show this, on the NES controller, the select and the start button are flat, while on the SNES controller, they have been angled towards the left. The D-pad is the exact same as the NES's D-pad, although the SNES controller's D-pad is a little bit brighter in terms of its colours compared to the NES's darker D-pad. Also, they have circled the body of it to give it more of a comfortable feel to it, and also to meet up with the 1990 standard of controllers. Also, the cord is now in the centre of the top rather than towards the left, unlike the NES which has the cord towards the left. But now, on the SNES, it's in the middle, so it's less of an eyesore. Also, Nintendo has added 2 new shoulder buttons on the top here, so this one is right and this one is left, or L and R. These 2 help give more function, since games of this era were starting to get more and more intense. Because on the NES, it hasn't got any shoulder buttons, because back then, games were really simple and 8-bit. While with the SNES, when it did came out, games were getting more 16-bit, so they were getting more demanding, and also they needed more functions, which is why Nintendo has added some shoulder buttons on the top of the SNES controller. And just like the NES, it's a very simple back-end design, so basically the same design. Next up, we have the N64 controller for the Nintendo 64 right here. This came out in 1996, and let me tell you, this controller was not well received at first because of its design. Now, design-wise, it now has grips. Remember, on the SNES it had no grips, so holding it can get a bit of a headache after a while. But with the N64 controller, it now has grips, so you can hold it easier, and also it doesn't get as tiring. Now, the weird thing about this controller is that it only has 1 analog stick, which is right here in the middle, which means that Nintendo gave this controller 3 handles rather than just 2. So holding this can be a bit bizarre. According to Nintendo, there are 3 different ways you can hold the controller. You can either hold like this, hold it like this, or what I usually hold it like, which is this. Also, the controller got rid of the X and Y buttons for the second time, and now we only have the B and the A button again. Also, Nintendo has added something called the control stick. Now, on the N64 controller, they're just buttons, but on the GameCube, it's a joystick, which I'll show you later. Now, this bit here does a different function depending on the game. So, for example, in Super Mario 64, this will control the camera. Now, we still have our shoulder buttons, but on the back of the controller, underneath this little slot right here, we now have a Z button. Also, this is the only Nintendo console to have an official slot right here for something. This slot right here is to install something called a Rumble Pack. This controller does not have Rumble as standard, and if you want Rumble, then you have to get a Rumble Pack that goes into the back of the slot right here. Once again, the D-pad is exactly the same as the previous controllers. Although in saying that, I'm pretty sure the N64's D-pad is bigger than on the SNES, which has a small D-pad. Yeah, this one's bigger than this one here. So even though it's weird, this is a good controller in my opinion, and I do like using it. And now we've got the Nintendo GameCube controller. This came out in 2001 along with the GameCube console itself. And let me tell you, this thing is amazing for its time. Firstly, we no longer have the control buttons on the controller. Instead, we now have a control stick right here. So it does the same function as the N64 controllers, but now it is an analog stick rather than a pair of buttons, so it's easier to use. Also, the Z button is now located right in front of the right trigger, and it's in purple. Also, you may notice that the face buttons are in a weird position. Now, the reason for this is because the GameCube's code name was Dolphin, and the face button alignment right here is supposed to represent a dolphin, and technically, I can actually kind of see it. Also, you may notice that the A and B button are now in different colors from the N64 controller. So the A button was blue on the N64, while the B button was green. But now on the GameCube, the A button's green and the B button is red. Also, the Y and the X button are now in a plain grey colour like the D-pad and the analog stick. The start button is much smaller than on the N64 controller, and also this is made out of plastic, while this is made out of rubber. And weirdly, the D-pad has seemed to shrunken down in size compared to the N64's controller's D-pad. Oh. Do you see that? It's weird about how Nintendo did that, and some people didn't like the D-pad because of how small it is. But personally, I didn't mind it. But overall, I really like this controller, and out of all the Nintendo controllers, this one's my personal favourite. In 2003, Nintendo has released a wireless version of this controller called the Wavebird. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the controller, but I have seen one in person though, and I have held it, and let me tell you about it. Firstly, its primary colour is silver compared to purple or black on the GameCube, although you can get this controller in silver or orange as well. Secondly, it has extra moulding between the D-pad and the control stick for a button to switch on the controller. And also you have to get this little adapter that plugs into the GameCube's controller port right there. And also, on the back, you have to insert some batteries in order for the controller to work. It's kind of similar to the Xbox controller where you have to insert batteries in order for it to work. Unlike the PlayStation controllers which have rechargeable batteries, so Next up, we have the Wii Remote. This came out in 2006 along with the Wii console itself, and this one has been completely redesigned from the previous controllers. And the reason for that is because in 2006, motion controls were becoming really common with wireless controllers. So for example, the Xbox 360 and the PS3 had wireless controls as standard, so Nintendo decided to take this in a new direction with their consoles, which is why the Wii has a Wii Remote, because you can hold it like an actual remote with this strap right here. And personally, I do think this is a clever controller because of its many aspects. I personally think Nintendo has got the control designs perfectly right. It does take batteries unfortunately, but it does last quite a while before it needs to be replaced. Also, we got two new buttons, 1 and 2, along with a home button, and the plus and the minus to indicate which motion. Later in the Wii's lifespan, Nintendo has released a different version of the Wii Remote, which I'm pretty sure is something to do with better response from the motions from this controller. So I'm holding these two, and this one definitely feels heavier, and it hasn't even got the strap on, while this has the strap and it feels lighter, so yeah. When the Wii came out, Nintendo decided to make a controller for those who want a normal controller, so they made this. Now, you may notice that it copies the design of the SNES controller, which looks like this. You can see that the face buttons are in the same position, the D-pad's in the same position, and the triggers are in the same position as well. But but it has the PlayStation analog sticks, and it also has extra buttons on the top for the extra shoulders. Now personally, I think this is a bit stupid because it hasn't got any grips, but luckily however, later in the Wii's lifespan, Nintendo has made a version of that controller with grips. Now we have the Wii U gamepad. This came out in 2012 along with the Wii U itself. Now the main thing about this controller is that it has a big touchscreen in the center along with a stylus right here. So this is very similar to the DS and the 3DS, which also have built-in styluses. It also has amiibo function right here, as you can see, which means that when you have an amiibo and you're playing a game that supports it, so for example Smash Brothers, you can scan it on here and you'll get that character to play. But you can also use it as sort of like a TV remote for your own TV, because if you look here, you got a TV control function there. So when you press it, on the screen it'll show you numbers that you can press to get a signal on your TV. And the gamepad also has a camera right there, so you can take selfies or whatever you want to do. However, don't think it's all good, because there are some things I don't like about the gamepad. Like firstly, the battery life sucks, because in my experience, the gamepad only lasts about 4 hours before it needs to recharge, which I think is a bit Also, it can get a bit glitchy, so just be warned about that. Problem for me though, it's just the way it feels. I mean, it's not exactly uncomfortable, but it doesn't really feel well built compared to what Nintendo had before and what they had after this. At the same time of the Wii U's release, Nintendo has released a different controller for it called the Wii U Pro Controller. And as you can see right here, it has dedicated a lot of the designs from the Wii Pro Controller. But there are some differences though. Like firstly, the analog sticks are now at the top of the controller rather than at the bottom. Also, it now has a power button because this is now a wireless controller, and also it has different triggers on the back, because on the original Wii Pro controller, the triggers are about the same size as the bumpers, just a little bit bigger, but now on the Wii U Pro controller, it has the Xbox 360 style rear triggers, and this is where you can change the battery if you need to, if it dies or whatever. And now we have the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. These two came out in 2017 along with the Nintendo Switch itself. Now, what makes this unique from the other controls is that these are now separate from each other. So this acts like the right side of the controller and this one acts like the left. Now, you can either hold the two like this or you can hold it against on the console like this. And the kickstand came off again. Whatever. Now the thing with the Joy-Cons, okay, is that they're pretty advanced for today's standards, and they still hold up well, I think. Now on the right Joy-Con, it has this little IR sensor at the bottom. Now I don't know what game supports this, but, you know, never used it before, so I don't know if that's necessary or not. Also, you can either hold the Joy-Con like this, or you can just hold it like this. But also we got a new button now on the left Joy-Con, which is this. When you press this, you can take a snapshot of what game you're playing, and if you hold it down, you can record the last 5 seconds of your gameplay. They both feature sync buttons, so you can sync these two up to the same console at the same time, basically. And they support something called a Joy-Con strap, where it goes onto the top here, and it has a little strap that you can put your hand through, so you can hold it kind of like a Wii remote, but a little bit smaller, and also more damage-like. At the same time of the Switch's release, we also got this. It's called the Switch Pro Controller. Now, it's similar to the Wii U Pro Controller, which I have right here, but there are some differences though. Firstly, the Switch now has a see-through body rather than the Wii U's, which has a solid body. Also, the analog sticks are now in different positions, because on the Wii U Pro controller, they're both at the top of the controller, but on the Switch Pro controller, the left one is in the same position, but the right one has moved down to the bottom right, next to the D-pad. Also, the X, Y, A and B buttons have now moved from the bottom to the top of the controller. The triggers on the Switch are much bigger than the ones on the Wii U's. And while the Wii U takes a mini USB cable, the Switch's controller takes a USB-C. And also, the feel of it is different, because the Wii U does feel a bit small and flimsy, while the Switch's controller feels stronger and more well built. So yeah, the Switch Pro controller, in my opinion, is a good controller, but I actually prefer using the Joy-Cons, to be honest. Well, that's it for the video, and I hope you enjoyed it. So, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.